Hello everyone, happy Sunday morning and welcome to the OTB channel. This is the first of a quick tip video that I'm thinking of turning into a series. It's aimed more than anything else at people who are perhaps fairly new to Linux and a little bit afraid of the command line, and I just want to show people how easy the command line is to use and how useful it can be. So for those of you who already know what I'm going to talk about on this, many apologies. I'm simply going to have a look at the .bashrc file today and talk about how we can manipulate our user paths, how we can create aliases, and how we can fiddle about and create customized bash prompts quite easily. Let me say before we actually start this, it's a good idea to always make a backup of your bashrc file just in case it all goes wrong. But okay, let's get to it and let's start. Let's start today by briefly looking at the concept of a path. In Linux and Unix-like operating systems, a user's path is where the shell would go and look for binaries to launch. So for instance, if I was to type a common command, df, it runs it without a problem. Why can it do this? It's because the location of the binary, df, is in my path. Let me just show you. If I type where is df, it tells me it's in the /bin directory. If I now have a look at my user path, which I can do by typing echo $ and path in capital letters, I can see the /bin is part of my path. If df had not been listed here in my path and I typed df, it wouldn't have been able to find the command. Okay, so let me illustrate this with a little script. Earlier today I created a small script called mypath in my home directory, and this is what it consists of. Scripts don't have to be complicated, by the way. They can just be a single command, and all I've pasted into this script is the echo $path command. Above that you'll see the # bin bash, which is what we call the shebang, and that is essentially what makes it as a script. I'm telling Linux to use bash to run that command. So that is in my home directory. Now, it's called mypath. If I just type mypath now, I'm going to get home Steve bin mypath, no such file or directory. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look and see why that might be by typing ls, and I find mypath doesn't have the X on its permissions, which means it's not executable. So I need to make mypath executable, and I do that by typing chmod +x mypath. So we've made the file executable. If I now just type mypath, it still doesn't work, even though I'm in the home Steve directory, and even though mypath is obviously there. So why is that? Well, quite simply, it's because my user path did not include the current directory. And the way that we get over this most of the time is to tell bash to look in the current directory. And we do that by simply typing a full stop, followed by a /, followed by mypath. Suddenly it works. So mypath doesn't work, but /mypath it does. You can run the script in other ways. You can call the shell directly and just type my path by typing sh my path, or I could even type bash my path. So wouldn't it be easier if I could just type my path and have my script run? Well, yes, it would. And we can do this by making an entry in our .bashrc file to extend my user path. So let me illustrate this by, first of all, making a directory. Let's call it scripts. Okay, let's just check it's there. There it is, up on the top right. Okay, let's move my path into that scripts directory. Let's cd to the scripts directory. There's my path. And again, I can't run that file on its own. I would have to do my path, or if I was in my home directory, I would have to type scripts, /scripts my path for it to work. Right, so how do I go about adding the scripts directory to my path? It's really quite easy. I'm going to use nano to open up my .bashrc file. Because we don't need sudo privileges to do this, you don't have to use nano. You can use a graphical text editor if you want. It's really straightforward. And I'm going to go down here where it says include bin in my path, which is something I've already included. And I'm just going to write include bin and scripts in path. And I'm going to add an extra entry. I've already got a separate directory in my home directory called bin, which I've added to my path. I'm going to add the scripts directory. And I do that very simply by adding a colon, again typing the $, so following from what I've done before, typing home, which is a variable that says it's in my home /Steve directory, and I'm going to add scripts. Okay, that's great. So I'm going to save that by hitting Control O, Control X, and I'm going to resource the bashrc file, and I'm going to try running my path. So echo $ path. There you can see at the end I've now got home /Steve /scripts. So in theory now, if I just type my path, let me clear this, it should work. And it does. So paths are all about what the terminal can see, where it looks to launch an executable or a script. I'm not a huge user of scripts, but it can be quite useful if for certain commands you find them a bit of a pain to type, and I'm not the world's best typist. I've used a very, very simple example here, but you can add an extra directory to your path in the bashrc file, which is read every time you launch the terminal. Now, when you want to make it a little bit simpler for yourself to run a particular command, you don't have to write a script. Like everything in Linux, there are various ways to do it. Another way that you can make life simpler for yourself is to use something called an alias. Now, aliases are simply a method of attaching a single word to a more complex command. And let me open up my bashrc and show you some that I've already created. If I scroll down, you'll see a few aliases are already set up for you in bashrc, and you just need to follow the syntax. These first 3 are set up automatically for you. I've also created another couple here. I've created an alias called apt-up, and I've attached that to the command sudo apt-update. I've created another one called apt-du in order to run sudo apt full upgrade, and there's a third one here called apt-all where I'm running sudo apt-update and sudo apt full upgrade, 2 commands in one. You sometimes see this double ampersand there. It's quite useful. What it actually means is run the second command only when the first command has finished. And if the first command doesn't finish for some reason, it errors out, the second command won't be run. I have another couple here for df and ifconfig, which I've put a comment in front of, so they're not currently active. So let me just come out of that, and on the basis of my aliases, rather than running sudo apt update, which I could do, I can just type apt up, and it does exactly the same thing. Rather than running sudo apt full upgrade, I could just type apt-du. If I wanted to do both commands in one, well, that's great. I'll just type apt-all. There we are. Pretty simple. So aliases, you can use whatever words you want. Just make sure they're not already an existing command. So bashrc, absolutely great for adding additions to your path. It's also great for managing aliases. A third thing you can do with your bashrc file, and this is the last thing I'm going to cover today, is you can actually use it to create fancy bash prompts. Let's look at the bash prompt. What I've got here that you can see on your screen is pretty much the default bash prompt. If I cd to another directory, say sbin, you'll see it shows my path, and it's coloured. I've added the colour to this, but you don't have to have it in this format. You can play around with your bash prompt and get it to look however you want. A pretty good website that I would suggest that you go to is called easyprompt.net. I'll include this in the comments at the end of this video if you want to access it. And you can create your own custom bash prompt here. And all you do is you click on the relevant elements. So I could click on my username, go to extra characters, click @ followed by my host name, followed by, I don't know, let's put my shell version, followed by, what else could we have? The time. Why not? So at the moment that's going to come out as user @host 4.2 because that's apparently the shell version. Actually, I'm going to get rid of the shell version. I'm not particularly wanting that. Let's just reset it. There we go. you just click on the element and delete it. So I've now got user at host. Let's put the 24-hour clock in there. Let's put another colon in. Let's put in the current directory, or path to the current directory. Right, let's make it a different colour. Let's go to our username, and perhaps we want to have a nice pink for that. We'll leave the @ white, and then we'll click our host name and we'll make that, I don't know, let's make it blue. Let's go to the time and let's make that red. Let's go to path to current directory and let's make that light blue. Okay, so it should look like that. User at host, followed by the time, followed by my current directory. Now, the way to test this page is quite useful because it copies the command, and all you have to do is go to your terminal, which I've already got open here. You can see the problem I have with typing. If I paste that command in, there you go. It's got a fairly nasty, coloured bash prompt there. I certainly wouldn't want that, but you get the idea. You can play around with it on this page to get it to look however you want it to look. Now, that's not going to be permanent. If I source my bashrc again, that's because I'm not in my home directory. If I source my bashrc again, you'll see that my prompt goes back to exactly what it was. So if I want to have a fancy bash prompt and I want to make it permanent, is there any way I can do that? Yes, there is, but I would suggest before you do this, you make a copy of your original .bashrc file. Just call it something like .bashrc backup. Then you can carry on and edit away. So if I go to nano.bashrc, this is an Ubuntu system, which is a Debian system ultimately. And if you move down to this section, which starts if color prompt equals yes, you can enter your own bash prompt here. Now, Debian syntax is actually pretty complicated, but actually it does some simple things. It talks a lot there about Debian ch root environment, and it's simply instructing bash that if we're in a ch root environment, we display the prompt in a particular way. However, you don't have to have it like that. You can, if you wish, and do this under the color prompt equals yes line. You can comment that out and insert your own PS1 line. I took this from the Easy Bash prompt generator. So I'm going to save that now and source my bashrc. You can see the problems I have with typing. I'm a dreadful typist. And I've suddenly now got a slightly different prompt. It's white, but if I move to sbin, it shows where I actually am, my working directory in red. Okay. Now, that might not be to your taste. You might like something a little bit more colourful. Well, that's great. You can list as many of these PS1 commands as you want, as long as you uncomment the ones that you're not using. So there's a more complicated one. You'll notice on these options I haven't included all the Debian chroot stuff, because that's only relevant if you're in a chroot environment anyway, so it's not vital for just messing about with your bash prompt. So I've put another one there now. I'm going to source bashrc again, and oh my goodness, I've now got red, green and yellow. What about if I change directory again to sbin? Right, red, green, yellow, green again. And you can basically do whatever you want with it. Personally, oops, it helps if I'm in my current directory. Personally, I prefer the first one, which is pretty much the default. So I'm just going to comment out that awful one, enable the first one, save it again, source my bashrc, and I'm back to something a little bit saner. Okay, so play around with the easy bash prompt generator, play around with your bashrc. Might be an idea before you start doing any of this stuff that you do actually save a copy of your bashrc. Just before I come out, I don't know if any of you are, talking of a little bit of bling, are actually aware of a little program called neofetch. You'll see here on my bashrc, I did have it commented out, but it's under a section called Launch Neofetch at Startup. If you want to use neofetch, you'll have to install it first, of course. But essentially, it gives you a little graph. Well, I'll show you what it is now. You might have seen this before. It will give you the little graphical information logo with what your system is actually running. And each time you launch your terminal, so if I do that now and I launch a terminal again, you will see that it launches neofetch. That's it for today. Right, so a little bit of playing around with bashrc. I know that I've repeated myself several times and mentioned that you really need to make a backup copy of bashrc before you start fiddling with it. And it's worth repeating. Please do so, because if you mess it up, you're going to come into all sorts of problems. But I hope you found that useful, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. I'll be producing another video next Saturday. Not sure what it is yet, but I'll see you then.